Last class period, we talked about types of knowledge and the connection. We kind of led into Bloom's taxonomy. Today, we're going to go more into Bloom's, but I want to give you a quick review. We're really breaking up long-term memory into explicit versus implicit. So we started the class off by covering the big four of types of knowledge, the ones that you'll see most in literature. And we talked about the big picture out of metacognition, metacognitive knowledge. If you're thinking about how these play into your learning, that is metacognition. But long-term memory is really broken up into explicit versus implicit, if we want to simplify that. And explicit would be more of the cognitive side of the house, so declarative memory, facts and events about whatever it is you're doing or learning. Episodic, so episodes, events and experiences. And then you have semantic, which is broken down into conceptual and conditional. Conceptual is linking concepts like we've been doing all semester. How are these theories interconnected? Just like we're connecting types of knowledge to Bloom's taxonomy, we're also connecting all the different theories as we move forward, and we're going to tie these into information processing theory in the middle part of the semester. So these are all interconnected. And conditional knowledge would be, how do we use certain information? And I gave the example of a four-way stop or primitive fire. How would we use the primitive fire activity from last class? Well, we would use it to make a fire in a survival situation. That's when do we use it? That's conditional knowledge. But on the implicit side of the house, the actual skill itself is procedural. A math formula is procedural, process. So understanding what to focus on first will help you out based on the class that you're in. So this week is all about, okay, I'm in this class. What should I focus on first to get new and novel information in, and then I can go to the secondary information. But what should I focus on first to get the most out of this information that's coming in? And then I told you that implicit wasn't just procedural, it was also that behavioral, emotional, affective side of the house. And then we're going to look at that in just a second. So the activity, if you're just focused on the skill, last class period, I asked you what was more important, explicit or implicit, when learning the thumb loop hand drill. So if this is a class where the activity is primitive fire, that's the example we would have done in the last class period. So if you're not in a class that's doing primitive fire and we have a different theme, just think of it in terms of the theme that we're covering for that week. All right, Bloom's taxonomy. How do we break up explicit versus implicit into Bloom's? How is Bloom's broken down? So Bloom's, let's cover that for just a second. Lower levels of learning. Let me give you some real life examples. So if you're taking a multiple choice test, you're going to have to remember certain key concepts. You're going to have to develop an understanding to answer some of those questions. It might take you into application. Application is kind of like that segue between the lower levels of learning and the upper levels of learning. But for most of your professors, we want to get you to the upper levels of learning. So that would be analysis, evaluation, creation. So let's just look at my class so that you can kind of see how I've designed it based on Bloom's. So if you're taking quizzes at the beginning of class, I'm trying to get you to remember some of these concepts and develop an understanding. So I'm trying to introduce those to you. Yes, I use the quizzes as a classroom management tool, but in case you haven't watched the lecture or gone through the information, I at least know you've been introduced to the big picture items if you've taken that quiz. That's going to help us apply what we've learned to the activity. So when I start, after I finish the lecture, after the quiz, and I introduce the activity, you can see the application of that activity. But in order to do that, you're going to have to kind of analyze and evaluate that activity. That's why I have those skill-based processes in the class so that you can go through analysis and evaluation in order to create that skill or recreate that skill. Create something of your own. So quizzes would be remembering and understanding. Application would be the activity itself. And it even covers analysis, evaluation, and creation, because you're creating a method of making primitive fire. Now, we can also look at the discussions. Why do I have you do the discussions at the end of the class? You're going to have to remember, you're going to have to develop an understanding in order to write about it. The actual process of writing about it is application. You're going to have to analyze and evaluate your thoughts to create that discussion. All of those discussions are going to go into the final project, and you're going to have to go back and edit out any mistakes. So that takes you back to analysis and evaluation and creation to create that final project at the end of the semester. So this is all in the cognitive domain. But remember, I said long-term memory was broken up into explicit and implicit. On the implicit side, you have the affective domain, emotions and feelings. That's what affects, that's where the behavioral side of the house comes in. And then we have the psychomotor. That was that process-oriented. So all of those skills that we would have done in class, all those activities are on the psychomotor side. So we're covering all three domains in this class. We're covering the cognitive domain. We're going to get to the affective domain. How does motivation, attribution, how do all of those other factors tie in to this course? That's going to be the second half. But also on the implicit side, we're covering the psychomotor. So for the first half of the semester, we're doing a really good job of covering the cognitive domain and the psychomotor domain. Now, this is a chart created by a university, and I love it because it takes Bloom's taxonomy and types of knowledge, and it merges those together in a matrices. So for factual knowledge, you see it here on this column. If you scroll over up here, it gives you Bloom's taxonomy broken down. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate. And for each one of these types of knowledge, it gives you a key word, so that if you're trying to write about what you're doing, you can use some of this terminology to show that you're covering this level of the cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy. So for the activity for today, where I'm going to go back up here to Bloom's on the cognitive domain, I want you to talk about Bloom's in simple terms. Only discuss the cognitive domain and tell me what level this activity is taking you to. Do you have to remember some concepts to do the gas pedal hand drill? Do you have to develop an understanding? Can you apply what you've seen in class? Did you have to analyze and evaluate the process in order to create an ember? So let's talk about this in ember creation if you're in a primitive fire class where we have that theme. If you want to, you can talk about the psychomotor, but I would prefer that you cover it in terms of the cognitive domain, on the levels of learning that you're getting to by applying these activities to the theoretical concept, or the learning concept being Bloom's taxonomy.